Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. Are you a little confused about sharpening and noise reduction in Luminar 4? Or maybe I should call it Details Enhancer and Denoise in Luminar 4? Well, in this video, I'm going to explain it to you and clear that all up. We're going to start out with an image that looks like this and end up with an image that looks like this. I'm going to start out by talking about sharpening, and I want to just clear something up right away. A lot of times when people are new to photography and they're just starting to get into post-processing, they're a little confused about what sharpening exactly is. Sometimes they think they could have an image that is out of focus and suddenly be able to make it in focus. And as far as post-processing is concerned, that is not what sharpening does. Sharpening really just enhances an image that is already sharp. It just brings out some of the detail in the image when you sharpen it. So you're not going to be able to rescue an image that has poor focus by applying some type of sharpening to it. It just doesn't work that way. Now what it actually does, I'm going to demonstrate with these gray bars. And what we'll do is we're going to zoom in. We're going to zoom way in. Let's go like 600% so we could see an edge. And what sharpening will do is it looks for a high contrast edge, and that high contrast edge could be between two objects at different colors, different tones, or anywhere in the image that has just an area that has something that is brighter against something darker, be it in color or tone. And what it will do is it will go right to that edge, right at that transition edge, like I have these gray bars, this darker gray bar touching this lighter gray bar. It will go right to this edge and it will add contrast to that edge. And again, in Luminar, it's a little different. They don't really have a sharpening filter in Luminar 4. They have a details enhancer filter. And you open that, you'll see that there's 3 detail sliders, and then below that is a sharpening slider. And if I take that sharpening slider and move it to the right, you'll notice that the dark bar right at that edge is getting a little darker, and the lighter bar right at that edge is getting a little lighter. And by definition, that is contrast. We added contrast to that edge by moving this slider to the right. It's as simple as that. Now we have some other kind of ripples coming off of that, and that's just a JPEG artifact, so you could ignore those. But the main thing it's doing is adding contrast. It's making the dark side a little darker right at that edge and the light side a little lighter. Now there is a advanced settings button, and if you click on that, you'll notice there's 4 more sliders. The top 2 deal with the detail slider. So those top 2 will enhance the detail sliders up here. And the bottom 2 are for the actual sharpening slider that I just moved. First of all, sharpening radius. You'll notice at that edge, it's got a certain thickness to it, where the dark side is and the light side is. It has a certain thickness. And if I move this radius slider to the right, I'm basically making it thicker. So I'm increasing the radius out from that edge. And of course, if I move it to the left, it will get thinner. Now in a real world scenario, the way you would apply or adjust the sharpening radius slider is really, it's dependent on what the fine detail is in your image. For example, if you shot a macro and it has an insect in it, and the insect has a lot of fine hairs coming off the body of the insect, in that instance, you're probably going to want to use a smaller radius, so you're going to move it to the left. If you're shooting a landscape and it doesn't have a lot of fine detail in it, you probably would want to push this more to the right. So it will be different for every type of image you're shooting. Now below that is sharpening masking, and what that does in Luminar, it really just kind of blunts the effect of the sharpening everywhere. Those of you that are familiar with Lightroom know that there is a masking slider in the details tab, and what that does is it will look for anywhere that's very expansively the same color or the same tone, and it will remove sharpening from that area. And it comes in really handy when you're working on a landscape with an expansive blue sky, and you don't want to sharpen the sky because you're just enhancing noise in the sky. So you would move the sharpening slider in Lightroom to the right, and it will remove the sharpening from the sky, but still keep it everywhere else. Unfortunately, Luminar isn't that quite advanced yet. So when you move this to the right, it just kind of blunts or softens the sharpening everywhere. So that, in my opinion, isn't super effective yet. Now, I have no inside knowledge of this, but I think that now that Luminar has kind of embraced the AI technology and they have it in their structure, AI structure, so it knows where to apply structure to an image. I suspect that down the road there'll be an update and the sharpening masking will be enhanced with AI, so it will know parts of the image that don't need to be sharpened, and it will then work accordingly. Now, still in this tab, we have the details sliders, small, medium, and large, and then we have this details protection and details masking. And again, that is not technically sharpening, but that's just going to give you the same look. It's kind of like clarity and texture in Lightroom, whereas texture would be more like a small detail and clarity is more medium and large. Same type of idea. That's something you could apply as well, and something I probably won't get in too much here because there is a lot of different things you could do to your image in Luminar that will make it sharper. And what you need to do is really not apply them all. So you don't want to go and do AI structure and add a lot of structure and go to light and add contrast, because again, when you're sharpening an image, you're adding contrast to that edge. It's very small edge, but contrast will do the same thing but on a bigger scale, and that kind of makes the image look sharper. And then you could go to the details enhancer and do small, medium, large details, the sharpening slider, and really it becomes too much. So you really have to be careful and use everything in moderation, I think would be a better way to put it. So we're going to reset this, and what we'll do is we'll go to a real world scenario. And in that real world scenario, we'll talk about the actual way we're going to go about processing the image. And the way I recommend you incorporate this when you incorporate sharpening and noise reduction in your workflow. And we're going to talk more specifically about noise reduction on this image as well. Now, my recommendation to you, this is a raw file. There's been no processing done to it at all. My recommendation to you is that you try to reduce noise as early in your workflow as possible. The more you add structure and contrast and detail enhancing and sharpening and all that stuff to your image, the more you're going to be enhancing the noise, and the more difficult that noise will be to get rid of. So do noise reduction, or denoise as they call it in Luminar 4, as soon as possible. What I recommend you do is go to the light tab first and adjust white balance. If your white balance is off, in this case I think it's fine. Then if your exposure isn't quite right, then adjust exposure next. And this exposure seems fine. Then do highlights, shadows, and then go to the advanced settings and do whites and blacks. So in this image, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go to the highlights. I'll pull those down a little bit. I'll open up those shadows a touch. What I like to do at this point is kind of make the image flat. So I'm kind of removing contrast. And again, that will help you more effectively remove the noise when you're making the image a little flatter. Although with the whites, I will kind of move that to the right a little bit. And then this left a little bit. All right, so I did white balance was fine, exposure was fine. I did highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks. Now I want to remove noise. So we're going to go to the denoise tab next. There isn't a lot here. We have two different types of noise in an image. We have luminosity noise and color noise. I recommend you do the color noise first, and we'll zoom in on this image. And if you look, hopefully you could see it in the video and on your monitor. If you look, there's a lot of noise in this image. It was shot at a very high ISO because, of course, the gorilla was inside in an enclosure, and I was using a long lens, so I had to use a faster shutter speed. and I used a higher ISO. I'll have all the details of my cameras and the settings in the description below this video. But if you look very carefully, you'll see that there's a lot of like grain type noise, but some of that is colored. There's a lot of blue dots, but also there's a lot of other dots too. There's green and red in there as well. And that's with this color denoise slider. And what you'll find is that it's not a gradual thing. You're going to move it to the right and it's going to seem like it's doing nothing. And then bam, you're going to hit a spot and it's gone. It just takes it away. And then if you move it anymore, it doesn't do anything any longer. So what you should do is just slowly move it to the right. If you have a slower computer, you're going to have to go really slow, because a lot of times the denoise filter will lag. And just keep moving it to the right until you see that kind of switch hit. And it's like right around 26. And it removed the color noise. Now the luminosity denoise slider will get rid of all that grain. And what we'll do is we'll move that to the right. Now this is great, like a linear type thing. The more you move it, the more it's going to smooth it out. But unfortunately, whenever you're doing noise reduction, it's kind of a balance between removing the noise and not removing any detail, or removing as little detail as possible. And if you look at the gorilla's face, now that I have luminosity denoise at 100, if I bring it back down to 0, you'll see that a lot of little fine detail is coming back in the face. The tiny little hairs that are on the eyelash or the eyes. As I move it to the right and it renders, you can see it kind of wipes it out. So you want to just put enough luminosity denoise to get rid of the noise as much as possible without sacrificing too much of the detail. Now personally, I like to do it in like a number of tens, meaning I'll move it to 50 or 60 and see, is that adequate? If not, then I'll move it to 70. And actually, as I do this, I'm seeing more color noise in there as well. So I can move this to the right a little more. And so you can move it to 80. And you could see, and you just want to make sure you're not obliterating that detail too much. Now, there is a slider down here called Boost. And what this does is it will just kind of make the luminosity denoise and the color denoise more effective if you move it to the right. And it will tend to supposedly not obliterate the detail. So if I move that way to the right, and you'll notice, let's say now as you look at it, we still have some detail in the gorilla's face. Now, if I move the boost slider all the way to 0 and let it render, it's as though nothing was applied. I'll turn this off and turn this on. So nothing was done. It's with boost at 0, these two sliders don't do anything. So the way I've kind of settled into adjusting or removing noise in an image in Luminar 4 is I will come in and I will like reset everything. And I will take boost and I will put it in the middle. I found that this works pretty well. So I'll put it like around 50. Then I'll take the color denoise and I'll move that to the right until I see that color kind of switch off. Be right around there. And then I'll take that luminosity slider and move it to a whole number. There's a lot of noise in this image, so like 50. And then I'll look at that and I could see there's still some noise in that color. There's a little color noise in there still. Move that to the right. So there, that looks pretty decent, but it's still not quite enough, let's say. So I'll go to 60. And that doesn't, still a lot there. I'll go to 70. Now this is abnormally high, I'll just say. Typically you wouldn't be moving these sliders this high, but there is a considerable amount of noise in this image. All right, now if I think 70 is okay, what I would do then is go to the boost slider and move it down until I am satisfied that I have that nice balance of still retaining some of the detail, but yet still removing enough of the noise so that it looks like a decent looking image. Alternatively, what you could do is if you think 70 was good and we're still on 50 on boost, move the luminosity to noise down to 65. So split between 60 and 70. Then go to the boost slider and move that up. So it's kind of a balancing act between the two sliders, mainly luminosity to noise and the boost slider. So to rehash what I would do is I immediately put boost at 50. I go to color to noise and move that to the right until the color is gone. Then I go to luminosity to noise and go to somewhere that's like a number of 10, like 10, 20, 30, 40. In this case, because I had a lot of noise, I jumped right to 50. Went to 60, still there. 70 looked pretty good. I would go to the boost slider and move it down. Or I could then back it, and 70 looked pretty good. I'd leave the boost slider at 50 and move the luminosity to noise down to 65, then move the boost slider up. And that's kind of the balancing act. And if we zoom back out, I think you'll see, hopefully in the video, that we did a pretty good job on the noise. So that's that. Now, once I do that, now I will work on, I got the tone, so I did the tone first with light. Then I did the noise. Next, I will work on color, whatever I need to do to enhance the color. So I would go to the color tab itself. In this case here, I'll just push saturation up a little bit. In advanced settings, let's say I want to make the grasses maybe a little more, a little brighter. Come in and do something like that. And all right, so then I would do color next. And then if there's any creative type things I want to do, I would do that now as well. Like, I don't know, if I wanted to add a sun ray or something like that, I would do at this point. Then once I'm pretty much done, I even maybe would add the vignette right now. I like to add a vignette. And we'll go here and I'll just brighten up in the middle a little bit. So I would add the vignette. Next, now then I would do sharpening. So then I would go to the details enhancer. And again, I would zoom in. And I would go to the sharpen slider first and just add a little sharpening. And usually you don't have to add a lot. In this case here, I love see all the details it brought out in the gorilla's face. Small details, maybe some of those finer hairs up there. Kind of move that to the right a little bit. Now you'll see as I'm doing, I'm enhancing the noise. So you really have to, it's kind of a balancing act like I mentioned. So you could jump back down to the noise and you could either push boost to the right or you could add the luminosity to noise to the right. I think we'll add it to 75. So now we'll bounce back between these two filters and go from there. But actually, I think that's pretty good right there. So I think that's pretty good. I would say that that is done. There's before, and there's after, and there's before, and there's after. One thing I didn't mention is there's other things you could do with graduated filters and brushes. And typically the brush tool, like I would come in whenever I think it needs it. If I want to do any spot removals, I would do that whenever I think it needs it. I don't have an exact place in my workflow where I'll do that. So if I wanted to add a brush stroke here, let's say to brighten his eyes, or her eyes, I should say, I would do it there, but I don't think I need to. Something like that. So that is sharpening and noise reduction in Luminar. In my opinion, it's just my opinion only, I don't think it's as advanced yet as it should be, and as it is in some other applications. You're going to find even in Lightroom that it's a little more advanced, a little more effective in Lightroom than it is in Luminar. But again, I cannot help but think that because they have that AI technology, that they'll be incorporating that into the sharpening and noise reduction sections of the application as well. Those of you that don't know, they actually bought out a company that did post-processing company that did this magical kind of processing to an image. It knew where the sky was and would process it. It knew where the person was and would process it. So they bought out that company and got all their AI technology and patents, and that's how they're now starting to put it in their application, and you're going to see it, I think. Again, go to these detail enhancer and denoise filters as well. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.